Well, welcome and thank you for being here. This is panel 2, integrating land use and transportation policy to support ecological connectivity. So hopefully that's where everybody wants to be this afternoon. Some other great sessions, so thank you for being here and welcome. My name is Neal Sharma. I'm with the Wildlife Conservation Network. I lead our California Wildlife Program, which is focused on connectivity conservation statewide, so restoring and protecting connectivity throughout California. I'm going to start out with just a very brief background on what led us to this session here today. So California, like many places, has a lot of issues to address around linear infrastructure, and there's a lot of great momentum right now around wildlife crossings. Of course, ICOET is an excellent, special if not unique opportunity to come together to learn the latest of how the impacts are understood and how folks are addressing them. And just as much attention, energy, and effort is really going into other issues throughout the landscape that relate to habitat availability and permeability. And so, California, in addition to many other things going forward, and I don't mean to be reductive here, does also have a legacy and momentum of sprawl. So a history of suburban sprawl, expanding wildland urban interface, intensification of land use in exurban settings. All of these things we know can drive habitat fragmentation and affect landscape permeability. So just as much a part of the situation, and ultimately realizing that we need to be thinking about all these issues throughout the landscape adequately and accounting for them if we're going to successfully conserve ecological connectivity throughout the landscape. So in this session, we wanted to pull together examples of how folks are accounting for connectivity and permeability, both in transportation and land use policy, and integrating those two. In California, we think about the issues we're dealing with throughout the landscape and how they intersect with topics like housing and wildfire safety and resilience. And these all intersect around land use with policy, of course, underscoring land use decisions. And so the purpose of this session is to look at how people are in different settings and contexts in the US are accounting for connectivity. So we're going to have a series of relatively brief presentations, and then we're going to have a good chunk of time for Q&A discussions. So please be thinking about what you'd like to raise and ask when we get there. We're going to do the presentations all straight through, and then we'll get into Q&A in that big block at the end. First up, we have Mari Galloway.
Thanks all. Thanks for joining our panel today. And I wanted to give a shout out to all the ICOET organizers who put an incredible event together. So just want to give a shout out to all of you. And a shout out to Neal for putting this panel together. It's a timely topic. So today I'm going to be chatting. My name is Mari Galloway. I'm California Program Director with Wildlands Network, 501c3 nonprofit. We work across North America to reconnect habitats for wildlife. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about some of the policies we've recently been working on trying to pass in California, the implementation to date, and lessons learned. So California, we're special. We're one of the most biodiverse states in the country. We have plants and animals that live, so many that live in California and nowhere else in the world. But unfortunately, we're also the most populous state in the nation, and we haven't done a very good job of coexisting with this incredible biodiversity. And so as a result, California has the most imperiled biodiversity of any state in the nation. So we need to figure out how we can create solutions to figure out how our residents, our tourists, our visitors to California can coexist with our biodiversity. And so we've been working on trying to advance policies to address a lot of the major drivers of this biodiversity loss, including roads, transportation, and land use planning. So today, my focus of the presentation is going to be on AB 2344, really looking at that transportation piece. And AB 2344, the Safe Roads and Wildlife Protection Act, was co-sponsored by both Wildlands Network and Center for Biological Diversity, and championed by lead author Assemblymember Friedman, which added section 158 to the Street and Highway Code. And that bill does a number of things. I've kind of loosely separated it into kind of planning and implementation buckets. And in the planning section, we have that Caltrans must create an inventory of wildlife connectivity needs on the state highway system. They have to identify those areas where wildlife passage features can reduce collisions or enhance connectivity. There's also in the planning side, they have to update the highway design manual by July 2025 to include wildlife passage designs. And then on the implementation side, there's two pieces to it. One is kind of a do no harm, which is this first, Caltrans shall remediate barriers, connectivity in conjunction with projects that are located in connectivity areas, which is very broadly defined, but areas that are identified by CDFW is important for connectivity, and areas where in projects that will significantly impair connectivity or add a traffic lane. So that's going to be in conjunction with all projects with the PID starting in 2025. And then the more forward-looking is the Transportation Wildlife Connectivity Remediation Program, which authorizes Caltrans to identify where these priority projects are and proactively implement standalone projects. But as you can see there, that's contingent on legislative appropriations, which was not appropriated, so no progress on that particular program has been made to date. So really, because of the timing of kind of the rollout of these various implementing requirements, really we've seen the most progress on this development of the inventory of connectivity needs, which Caltrans released in October of last year. And as you can see, I think there's over 73 locations are identified in the priorities unfunded and a handful in both planned and active funded locations. There's a little bit of ambiguity on how these priorities were selected. The most detail I could find is in this quote here from the mapping resource that district expert staff nominated barrier locations and provided science and data related to species diversity. And even though these other kind of components weren't necessarily requirements of the bill, they happened in the last few years and I think are really important to the ability of AB 2344 to be fully implemented. 2023, which was the next year after 2344 passed, Governor Newsom put in a budget change proposal to hire 9 full-time staff at Caltrans and 8 at California Department of Fish and Wildlife to implement 2344. So 17 new full-time staff, which is hugely exciting to add capacity in such a large state. And also, California Department of Fish and Wildlife has both updated their priority barriers, their identification of where these priority barriers are in the landscape. I've heard their next update is imminent, so keep checking that out on their website for folks who are interested in that. They've also updated a lot of their publicly available GIS tools under BIOS, and so all of these habitat connectivity layers are found in one place on their website. So all of these is, again, helping, inform and provide capacity for implementing 2344. This isn't without its challenges. AB 2344, some folks have said, is like an arranged marriage between California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Caltrans. I don't think they're necessarily wrong. And like what you can imagine probably with arranged marriages, there's a bit of issues in getting some great collaboration right off the bat and bringing together data and resources and identifying barriers. And so there's been a little bit of trouble to try to get some of that collaboration happening at all levels, but nevertheless, there's some really amazing collaborations happening at the district level on the ground, and Caltrans director and CDFW's director have been very supportive of trying to move these crossings forward. So what's next? We're continually working to try to help add to this data and add to information on methodologies, showing kind of examples from other states that have successfully implemented similar programs, and really just trying to get everybody rowing in the same direction. And upcoming, possibly, AB 902 is another bill that we're working on in co-sponsorship with Center for Biological Diversity and Assemblymember Schultz's office. And we're trying to expand those 2344 requirements to all city and county roads and where all lead agencies also have to comply with those requirements. So fingers crossed, that's working its way through the legislature currently. And that would add another subsection to the state and highway code. And with that, I'll pass it off to Tiffany again.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Neal, for inviting me to on this panel. And thank you, Maury, for kicking us off on the presentation about California policy. I'm going to continue talking about that, but first, just a quick introduction. My name is Tiffany Yap. I'm a senior scientist at the Center for Biological Diversity. We are a national nonprofit in the US. And our mission is to secure a future for all species, great and small, by using science, law, and creative media to protect the lands, waters, and climate that species need to survive. And so we've been involved in the protections of more than 600 endangered species and more than 400 million acres of habitat. And I work in the urban wildlands program, and we often focus our work in California. And a lot of the work that we do is we push for science-driven policy and legislation and fight against poorly planned development. So I just want to give a quick definition of the urban wildland interface, because it is where a lot of the work I do is focused on. It is where homes and other human infrastructure and activities extend into undeveloped wildlands. And I think it's important because oftentimes we think of ourselves as separate from nature, but actually we're very much part of these ecosystems. And it's in this urban wildland interface, this transition zone, where we interact the most with wildlife, but also that is where the most of the conflict happens between people and wildlife. And this conflict is most easily seen on our roads. But fortunately, there are really great solutions that we have to them, and AB 2344 is hoping to get more of them in place. And there are so many great people here doing really amazing work to innovate, and as we learn more and more about species needs. But another important aspect of connectivity is wildlife being able to move through our neighborhoods and on the sides of where those wildlife crossings are. And so these are all, urban biodiversity is incredibly important. And these are all photos that were taken within the city limits of San Francisco, California, Los Angeles, California, and Austin, Texas. And so it's really important that these species have enough ability to move through our neighborhoods and our cities so that not only they can thrive, but they can survive. So enter AB 1889, the Room to Roam Act. It was passed in 2024. It was authored by former Assembly member Laura Friedman and co-sponsored by us in the Wildlands Network. And it requires local governments to incorporate wildlife connectivity in their general plans, in part by identifying existing or planned wildlife crossings so that we can ensure that there's habitat protected on both sides of those crossings so that they remain functional. And so we really saw this as a natural extension of AB 2344 because we want to make sure that they're going to remain functional over the long term. It also requires local governments to consider implementing measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts to wildlife movement and consider opportunities for remediation. And so what does that look like? It can take a lot of different forms. Some of that is ensuring that when roads are retrofitted, the habitat on both sides of those crossings are beneficial to as many species as possible. Also reducing light pollution at night so that migratory birds and bats and other nocturnal species can get to where they need to go safely. It's also planting more native plants in our backyards and in our neighborhoods and in local parks so that we can have more habitat for local native pollinators and have more connectivity for them. It's also removing unnecessary fencing or repairing fencing that is needed, but we can make it more wildlife friendly. It's also removing rodenticides from the landscape and maybe encouraging natural predators to help us with pests. And it's also doing things like incorporating things like predator-proof enclosures for farm animals at night, so we can really try to minimize impacts and conflict between predators and farm animals and pets. So there hasn't been a ton of time for implementation on that yet, but what's really awesome is that Ventura County has passed a wildlife movement and habitat connectivity ordinances. They passed it in 2019, so they're actually already in compliance with AB 1889. And what they did was they identified important connectivity areas. They call them designated corridors. And then any new development in these designated corridors are subject to specific regulations. So that's things like needing a discretionary permit if they want to develop within 200 feet of a surface water feature or an identified wildlife crossing, having restrictions on outdoor lighting at night and impermeable fencing. They're not allowed to plant any invasive plants, and any hollow poles must be filled or capped so that small animals don't get trapped in them. And then within these designated corridors, they have critical wildlife passage areas that have been identified as even more of a priority. So these are areas that have intact native habitat. They might be near water bodies or ridge lines. They might be near a wildlife crossing structure. They might be vulnerable to development, or they might be really important for regional connectivity. And so any new development in these areas needs to be more compact, and structures need to be within 100 feet from each other. And so luckily I was able to talk with some county staff to talk about how implementation has been going over the past 6 years. And they very graciously gave us some lessons learned and recommendations. And so some of the lessons learned from their ordinances was that complex legal language is very difficult to interpret, and it can be a psychological barrier for planners. And so it's really important to ensure that any language that's in these kinds of ordinances is clear enough for people who are implementing it can understand it as much as possible. Ground truthing is really important as well. Ideally, it happens before the boundaries get set, but understanding that that's not always possible, it's really important to have accommodations for revisions so that we can ensure that what needs to be prioritized is being prioritized. And then they didn't have any noise-related regulations in their original ordinances, and they did really regret that. And so they want to ensure that noise-related minimization and mitigation measures are considered. And when it comes to general plan policies, some of the recommendations they had were to develop recommended policies that include biologically meaningful targets to share with jurisdictions so they can use them as guidelines or a sort of template. They also encourage integrating an interdisciplinary team, which includes planners, to develop and write the policies. And they also suggest looking for opportunities to address other issues at the same time, like wildfire risk, flood risk, and sea level rise. And so that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Here's information for me and Mari if you want to get in touch with us, and some great footage from their wildlife cameras.
Can I tag you in, please? Here we go. Is that okay?
Yeah, it should fix itself up here.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. It's this one, right? Or of the deer one, right? Yes.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no worries.
So my name's Todd Black. And I like to wear hats, but I do have all my hair. So I come from Utah State University, there for over 25 years as a researcher working primarily on sage grouse and mule deer across the state of Utah, across western states. The Eagle Mountain, a friend of Eagle Mountain called me a few years ago and said, hey, what can you do to help us? I'm like, well, what do you need? And so we talked about just doing some consulting stuff, but I decided that I'd had enough of Utah State University and sage grouse funding was running out. So here I am. I've been here for 4 years. And I really am a mule deer junkie at heart. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, saving mule deer. So what I'm going to do today is just talk about some of the things we're doing in Eagle Mountain and how they have integrated data into policy and now into actions. So we'll just run through this. Just a quote down here from Ed Arnett, give or take, if anybody was at this TUS conference last year, but he basically said, that look, the biggest threat to wildlife is we the people. We as wildlife professionals need to get involved with counties, with cities, in the early stages of development and work with them to say, hey, this is what we ought to be doing. These are some of the things that we could be doing. So the more I get involved with politics, even at the city level, the more important it is. So just a little bit of history and some timeline here, how this all happened. Utah started in early 2017, even into 2016, and started putting GPS transmitters on all the animals across the states, but a lot of mule deer. We had it was kind of a cool thing that happened too. If any of you are on military bases, there was a sentinel landscape that passed in 2018, and so that really helped with a lot of funding issues and things like that. That was the West Traverse Sentinel Landscape Act. UDWR, a lot of transmitters on deer that really helped define this migration route. In 2020, they came and said to the Division of Wildlife, or came to the city and said, hey, look, we've got all these deer that are getting walked on the road. This is where they move through. We know they're moving through this area. We don't want to build homes in this area. What can y'all do to help? So Eagle Mountain City, with the help of the Division of Wildlife, drafted and implemented and passed our wildlife code, our wildlife overlay code zone, or wildlife overlay zone code in 2021. And they hired me shortly after that. And as far as I know, there may be some in California or back in some bigger cities, but certainly not the norm to hire a wildlife biologist for your city. And then just recently, this Great Salt Lake Sentinel Landscape also passed a bigger polygon, a bigger geographic area that now includes all of Eagle Mountain and all of Cedar Valley. One thing that I want to emphasize too through this, and hopefully this isn't any earth-shattering and new news, but involving as many partners as you can, involving as many citizens as you can, involving as many people as you can to get, not only get them on board, but inform partnerships, but also to help find the funding. So this just isn't an Eagle Mountain, Utah Division of Wildlife deal. UDOT has been very helpful in this. A local conservation organization in Eagle Mountain that we just refer to as the Alliance has been very involved with this. The Mule Deer Foundation, our regional director for Utah lives right in Eagle Mountain, so they're opening their checkbook quite a bit to help us out. So these partnerships are very important. So if you don't know where Eagle Mountain is, this is Utah Lake. The Great Salt Lake, and Salt Lake is about 20 miles north of that. And Eagle Mountain is that red polygon there. The white and round polygons are areas that have been designated by the Division of Wildlife as mule deer summer and winter range and critical winter range. So what this chapter 1749 does is it establishes the land use regulations that are going to protect these wildlife areas within Eagle Mountain. Specific languages in there as it provides wildlife corridors and landscape linkages, so connecting of habitat, and that protects species, not just mule deer, that are rare or threatened, endangered, or otherwise deemed of significance to Eagle Mountain and the people of Eagle Mountain. There's a lot of good language in there that, as far as I get, people ask me all the time, well, how is this not a take of private property, right? So that's, to me, very important. I don't want us to go in and steal anybody's property, condemn their property because there's a mule deer migration herd that goes through there. So there's a lot of different things that are in place that within this code that allow us to work with developers, with landowners to do some density transfers, to do open space and park and amenity transfers into these corridors, into these areas. Conservation easements, the Sentinel Landscape, and the funds that are available through that program through ACAB, which is Army Compatible Use Buffer. And through that Sentinel Landscape, there's a lot of opportunities for landowners to get on these conservation easements. And these conservation easements are paying basically 90 cents on the dollar, not 40 and 50 cents on the dollar. So it's very enticing, a very big carrot to these landowners. Another thing with this corridor is that it basically eliminates recreation during the migrating season. So in the fall, in the spring, when they come back, we're able to shut that down and not have any recreation, so we can avoid human-wildlife conflict during those time periods. We don't need to talk a lot about conservation easements. So this isn't all coming up. The map on the left is what, when they passed in 2021, that yellow, not the yellow outline, but the yellow polygon is what that migration corridor, this wildlife corridor overlay zone, that's what it looked like. So you can see that it goes clear up to Camp Williams, which is the red, and then clear down through the town of the city of Eagle Mountain onto a lot of BLM property on the east side there. So that's what it kind of looked like before we started. Sure, what's going on here, technical difficulties. This is kind of what it looks like now. One of the first things that I did when I got there was like, I don't want to have 10 different crossings across different roads and things like that. So one of the things I did when I first got there is, what is this really going to look like when we put bridges over, when we put overpasses and underpasses and fence to keep the deer in what I've called the luge? What is it really going to look like? And so this is what it's starting to shape up like now. By the time we're all said and done, we're going to have over 25 miles of fence just within the city. Yeah, and we will have the main crossing right now that we'll talk about is a at-grade crossing now. In 10 years from now, when we build a freeway out there, it will be an underpass. Shortly thereafter, we have an underpass through another road via a wash, a natural wash that occurs through there. But then this is what's going to get really tricky from and different from any of the literature and stuff that's out there, is we're going to have 6 at-grade crossings on our city streets, right? So this is going to, you know, either a electrified mat, double cattle guards, turnstiles so that people can use the sidewalk and go through, but the deer can't get out of the luge. So a lot of tall black redneck engineering still needs to take place on a lot of these things. So this just kind of indicates where those are at. That main crossing up there on the highway, we're one of the first cities, first entities to put in a thermal IR detection system. So that's been installed and it's been up for 5 migration events. But then those other, the blue X is where we're going to have an overpass over a 4-lane parkway within the city. It occurs in the natural higher elevation area where there's a lot of good mule deer habitat on the both on the east and the west side of that road. But then again, we still have another major highway that we're going to have to do. We've changed it already to an underpass based on what the current engineering is, but it'll be another 6-lane major highway that goes over the hill into to Utah Lake on the other side. So a lot of yet is still to come, and a lot of unknowns are still going to have to be worked through. So let's talk a little bit about this crossing on SR 73. Prior to its installation, we were losing teens to as many as 30 deer during these migration events on that highway. So UDOT put a snow fence on the north side, and then on the south side of that highway, they put this 8-foot tall wildlife mule deer impermeable fence in. And they left gaps both on the north side and on the south side of that that were 70 feet. And with the intent of, we were going to put this detection system in, and that's where the deer had to cross the road. So that's kind of about where I started. The first year I got there, the fence was done, a little portion on the south side still needed to be completed, but that grant, those monies were just going to go away, and because the person that was involved with that from the Division of Wildlife took another job, and so I had to do a lot of political stuff I didn't want to do, and call in some political favors to get funding for that. But we got that installed, and to date, just anecdotally, Patricia Kramer will talk about this a little bit later, but anecdotally, it's significantly reduced our deer vehicle collisions. We're up to 4 deer in the last 5 crossing events. Like, compare that to our city street, that 4-lane parkway, we lost 12 just this spring. So huge difference that thing's doing it. Essentially, we've had some kinks that we're still working out with having ravens, of all things, trigger that system. People obviously will pull into that little structure there you can see as a cell phone tower. So people will pull in there and trigger that. So we've had some triggers that are negative results that are not deer. But again, it has really got motorists to slow down and be more aware. We put one of the, again, this is Todd Black redneck biology, but one thing that I think really helped this is having some visual cues for those deer to see on the opposite side of the road. So that's Sally and Jane, and you can't see the other 2 ladies that are in the field just across the road, so that as the deer come to cross, they can say, oh, well, there's Sally and Jane, so I know I can cross right through here. So it's been pretty cool to see that. We've got good trail camera data from that, and then also with this event right here, when it snowed, we're able to track the deer right up to those other deer, decoy deer. So, I don't know, I kind of covered all this in here real quick. These are our different overpasses and that grade crossings that we're gonna have to do. And this is another thing that's very unique, is we don't have a source of funding to tap into. These are all city streets. We can't tap into UDOT. These are all city problems. And these are all city bridges and city underpasses and overpasses. And so we have some really unique challenges there. And the Division of Wildlife has been very good to help us with applying for some of these grants and then funneling some money to us through some different programs that Utah has set up. But it's a struggle for us to find money. I'm still looking for a sugar mama, if anybody knows one. So I guess we'll just do questions later. Thank you.
Just a blank one. Yep. Nothing there. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you and welcome to me. I'm here now. My name is Miles Cottom. I am the planning director for Chaffee County, Colorado. I am a recovering attorney, so there's nothing I love more than a captive audience. But I'm here to talk today about a local land use example, specifically the one I've worked on, but really touching on why land use and zoning issues are so important at a local level. Land use zoning stuff may not be the sort of sexy major overpass project, but they may not be as visible, but often local efforts are the only way to ensure the long-term viability and relative success of these projects. They also help really hit at important local concerns. And the community where I work, those concerns are not dissimilar from what I imagine your communities are as well. We've got the standard issue wildlife conservation, whether that's for intrinsic reasons, whether it's for hunting and fishing enthusiasts, or to keep those wildlife tourists coming. Protections for wildlife are codified in our comprehensive plan, and our community about 8 years ago voted to tax itself in part to provide protections for wildlife habitat. You've also got open space considerations. That's for recreation purposes, for view sheds, for ecosystems, in our community also for agriculture. And I think it's important here to note that connection between open space and agriculture, because one quick way for particularly rural communities to see an open space project go directly into the toilet is to lump agriculture and open space together. Lumping those two together is a great way to have your next public meeting feature the strong smell of sunscreen and manure and a bunch of pissed off ranchers. One of the reasons that we were successful in Chaffee County of getting getting the ranchers support for a lot of our habitat conservation is because it helps alleviate a little bit of that burden that those guys have by spreading out some of that wildlife habitat. So it's not always, particularly in winter range, these large animals grazing on cut hay fields or the places that are still irrigated. But at any rate, I don't think I have to continue to belabor the benefits of open space to this group, nor do I really have to get much into safety. But we did find, at least in our county, that 25% of our reported crashes are vehicle wildlife collisions. And based on CDOT data, we have our traffic volume is up about 60% in the last 25 years. So obviously we recognize that that is a problem. And then there are the economic impacts of this. And I know somebody out there is going to, well, actually these figures, I'll note they came from Kylie, so yell at her instead. I probably should have introduced where Chaffee County is first, but I hit shuffle on the PowerPoint, so this is what you get. We are a statutory county. The last time I gave this presentation, it was to a group of lawyers, so that mattered to them. But we are right there, kind of, this is the state of Colorado. We are just off center. As I stand here right now, we are about 2.5 hours that way. So up in the Rocky Mountains, we're a county of about 650,000 total acres. That's a little over 1,000 square miles. Because this is an international conference, that's a little bit bigger than Luxembourg, but smaller than Trinidad and Tobago. But there's 2 of them, so that's not really fair. 20%, approximately 20% of our county is private land. The other 80% is public. Either it's BLM, Bureau of Land Management, or U.S. Forest Service. We've got a national monument, but we are in charge at the county level of about 25 or 20% of that land area. There are, in our county, it's relatively small. There are just over 20,000 people that live there, including that, well, and also that dog. But I see a number of Chaffee County folks here today, so we've got a significant population that has come here for this. How about that? So what have we done and how did we do it? One of the first projects we took on was a planning for wildlife map. And this was developed through a county-led effort with partners from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, and other local wildlife biologists and habitat experts. We mapped and designated all portions of the county based on the quality of habitat. And ultimately we ended up with, I think, 5 labels. So we have undisturbed, highest quality habitat, undisturbed, high quality habitat, disturbed high quality habitat, disturbed lower quality, and other. So these are not the most scientific labels, but they work. So you can see this is kind of a large scale version of that map. And here's what it looks like on a little more granular scale. You can see that green, dark green, and kind of tealish colors are our high and highest quality habitats. This is overlaid with our parcel layer, so you can see where the developments happened. This is the town of Buena Vista, Colorado. And you can see kind of running north to south right down the middle is an old historic migration corridor for mule deer primarily, but we know that elk and pronghorn also use it. That large neighborhood to the northwest there, in the classic Western way of naming the neighborhood after what you've destroyed, is called Game Trail. So this map was part of our land use code update. So our land use code, or our land development regulations, we produced this map and then incorporated that into our land use and zoning regulations effective January 1st of this year. This is about a 3-year effort that I told everybody would take about 2 years, so that's on me, but it's done. And one of the things that we've included is the identification in the code is we've codified the requirement to identify those wildlife areas. We took that first step of mapping the whole county, but when you're coming into the county to do a development project on a piece of land, we require that you identify that wildlife habitat. And we also require that any impacts to high or highest quality habitat be avoided if at all possible. We recognize it can't be avoided in all instances. You know, if there's a single piece of privately owned property that is entirely within a highest quality habitat. So we also then have a table of required mitigation actions that accompanies that. You can see this table here. So we require that, you know, in wildlife corridors, known wildlife corridors, habitats, these patterns are not set in stone. And so we will require a wildlife report be produced by a qualified professional that helps to identify maybe more of the parcel specific elements to that development project, because we've mapped it on a landscape scale, but you're doing a development project on a very parcel specific scale. So for any development proposed in the highest quality, we have that one. But you can also see we have some very specific mitigation actions that are required. So if you're in the highest quality habitat, for example, you are not allowed to, we have specific requirements for the siting of roads, as well as mandating safe passage structures if necessary. So new roads shall be located outside the mapped high and highest quality habitat areas. So we have codified that you cannot build a new road through that highest quality habitat if it can possibly be avoided. One of the other things we've done to try to increase some of this connectivity is required clustered subdivision design. So if a property owner is proposing a subdivision in the highest quality habitat, that subdivision is required to be clustered with 2/3 of that property preserved in perpetuity as protected open space, either through conservation easement, deed restriction, or some other instrument that preserves that from development in perpetuity. As a incentive for that, we also give a 4x density bonus, which I suppose would be helpful, a little more helpful if you had some zoning context. So Chaffee County does have zoning, and most of this applies to, on this map of Chaffee County, what is that brown area. So the blue is our PCR zone, or our public conservation recreation zone. That's mostly public land. The brown is what we call agriculture and ranching, and that's the bulk of the private land in the county. You can see everything in black is our 3 municipalities. You've got Poncha Springs and Salida and Buena Vista up north, but that brown zone really encompasses a lot of what we've got down there on the valley floor. The Arkansas River runs north to south through almost the entirety of our county, but that's kind of a helpful illustration of where this applies. So back to clustering, there's a density bonus of 4x, which I realize is pretty high. But because our county just recently in the zoning plan went from 1 unit per 2 acres as the maximum or the minimum, the allowed density, we have significantly downzoned those portions of the county to now 1 unit per 35 acres. So we've done a significant downzone there that allowed for that density bonus to take effect with that sort of conservation area principle in mind. And again, sort of we try to be very mindful of where these habitat areas or where these protected open spaces, how they're sited as well. So these resource stewardship areas, as we call them, have to be contiguous and undivided. So you can't just say, oh, well, I've got a lot here, and a lot there, and we're going to kind of snake the open space in between there. You've got to site those such that they are contiguous with one another, that they are undivided. And, hopefully, I think that will, or at least our goal here is that those will hopefully be able to provide for better habitat connectivity. We do note, as mentioned earlier, agricultural operations do count as open space. So somebody could preserve an irrigated field as part of this. But in our rural county, I think that was paramount to getting this thing across the finish line. Again, roads shall not be sited in the resource stewardship area whenever possible. And then we also have setbacks that we've instituted from those habitat areas, depending on the type of habitat. So we've got a setback table here from our, we require setbacks from lakes and from wetlands and from rivers. But if you are a river or stream within that highest quality habitat, your development has to be set back at least 300 feet. If you are, and then in general, even if it's not a river, your development has to be set back at least 100 feet from the delineation of that habitat boundary. This, I think this kind of speaks to some of those same points of trying to reduce vehicle-wildlife collisions. We also just sort of want to make sure we're not protecting a bunch of land for what we're calling habitat connectivity and then letting folks sort of build right on the edge of it that then diminishes most of the value of that habitat. We also take into account road design. Our road design standards require that where road impacts to habitats, big game migration corridors, and big game winter ranges cannot be avoided, the impacts of roads shall be minimized and mitigated using contextually appropriate design techniques. And, Tiffany just mentioned how kind of problematic a lot of this legalese is. I already told you about my background, so that's my fault, but we're going to keep using it. I think one of the important things about Chaffee County, and one of the reasons this is important for us too, is that we have the critical winter range for almost all of the big game species for a 7-county radius. So Pitkin County, Gunnison County, Park County, most of those ungulates, the mule deer, elk, pronghorn, they winter in Chaffee County. And so we recognize we have a regional responsibility as well to protect for that, but we're also codifying these requirements that when you do put a road in one of these areas, it's got to be designed appropriately. And what does that mean? At least from our perspective, either it could be reduced design speeds, it could be narrower widths, it could be traffic calming or wildlife passage structures, fencing, at-grade crossings, or potentially seasonal closures, depending on where you're going. We have a lot of areas in the county that are, not a lot, we have some areas of the county that are really more seasonal. There's too much snow to access in the winter, and so that maybe, hey, we're not going to put a permanent road in there. I've got some examples here. Thank you to Ben Goldfarb. I absolutely stole these pictures from one of his earlier presentations, but you can see kind of some of the things we provide these as examples for folks that we're trying to let them know, hey, here's what you can do. Here's some examples of things. Obviously, the culvert shelf. You could also, one of the things we want to do, and I actually plan to have done by this presentation, but I certainly didn't do it. I took a vacation instead, was a design manual. So we are working on a local design manual that helps provide some ideas for folks, for private developers to use when we are requiring this, just to take a little bit of that burden off of them. And then finally, I will leave you with the only wildlife crossing infrastructure project I've ever done, which was a gingerbread, fully edible structure for the holidays this year. So I'll be around. And then you have that picture. It's in your kitchen. No, but I ate it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Hough with Douglas County. I'm the Environmental Resources Coordinator. So I'm going to talk to you about what Douglas County has been doing over the last 30 years in terms of building a wildlife habitat and corridor system and planning and whatnot. So it starts with a plan. Where's the habitat? Where are the protected lands? How do we connect them? In addition, so this is the Front Range of Colorado. So you from the state know this, others outside. So up at the top there, that blue halo is Fort Collins. The big one in the middle is Denver. South one is Colorado Springs and Fort Carson. You can see that this corridor is rapidly developing. And from a landscape scale, there's only a couple of options for broad scale east-west movement. The one to the north is mostly farmland, and it's bare all winter long, and it's rapidly developing. Southern Douglas County, where the green arrow is largely protected. And so this is the only viable east-west regional scale corridor that can connect the mountains to the plains in this Front Range area. This is our protected lands map. So this is Douglas County. In the southwest corner, that sage color is Pike National Forest, which is about 26.5% of the county. The three green colored, darker green, are state parks within the county. The blue one in the top left is a state wildlife area. The browns are mostly county open space, and the yellows and other colors are private lands protected by conservation easement. In total, we probably protect about 65,000 acres through county open space acquisitions and open space easements. Douglas County's approach is an ecosystem-based approach. We're trying to protect larger blocks of habitat where possible, securing various habitat types within that overall protection scheme. We're looking for contiguity, movement corridors, and of course, stream corridors are very important because the riparian habitat is the highest value habitat. More species use that than any of our other habitat types. Plus they're linear and they make good connections. This is our comprehensive master plan wildlife resources map. So Miles was just talking about their comprehensive plan. This is the map from our comprehensive plan. We incorporated this into our plan about 23 years ago. It's gone through a few updates, but some planners back then had the foresight, brought CPW in and developed this map. You can see here, the green, it doesn't stand out real well, but those are our large blocks of protected habitat. So those are 90 to 95% protected within those blocks. So those are our core habitat areas. The goldenrod colored things are stream corridors for connectivity, and the red hash marked areas are overland connection areas. Not all movement happens in stream corridors. Sometimes it's overland. It's not as defined as in a stream corridor. These are tier 1 resources, meaning that they are of county to regional scale. And there's corresponding protections in the policies and whatnot within that master plan to accommodate those. The carrot and the stick. Douglas County has done much more to protect wildlife habitat in the corridors through incentives and proactive means than we have through regulation. So public acquisitions, conservation easements, whether that's purchased by a government entity or the landowners taking advantage of the state tax incentives for conservation easements. And of course, our existing partners, Forest Service, state parks, state wildlife areas, things like that contribute greatly. And I neglected to put on here that the citizens also passed 2 times now sales tax for acquisitions of open space and things like that. And that's largely where our funding for county purchases came from. So I can easily document, not adjusted for inflation, $307 million spent over 30 years for county fee title purchases. Some of this came from grant assistance, partner land purchases, conservation easements, and probably about $52 million I could document in highway improvements. So underpasses and overpasses, some by the county, some by CDOT. In our system, you'll see those in a minute here. We protect through fee title purchases, conservation easements, open space agreements, deed restrictions, as Miles noted. There's different legal instruments for protecting land. These are 3 of them. Viable farms and ranches are good protections. I mean, they're not permanent, but it's a good long-term system to protect habitat. And of course, we do have our regulations as well. So some of our incentives are in our master plan and our zoning and subdivision resolutions. This is a rural site plan process that largely shapes some of our rural areas of the county. This is an example of one rural site plan. If a landowner protects 2/3 of their land as open space or more, they get a double density bonus. So they can do 2 units per 35 instead of 1 unit per 35. The exemption process, no density bonus, but you can create lots smaller than 35 as long as you can create 1 or more large ones, and it balances out to no more than one lot per 35 acres. This is Highlands Ranch. So this is a very large subdivision that's part of the south end of the Denver metro area, but they protected 8,200 acres of open space as part of that planning process over the last probably 30 years. Our comprehensive master plan section, so that's the philosophy of land use within the county. Section 9 is again our wildlife plan. It's got that tier 1 resources map. So if it's a county to regional scale, it appears on that map. And our policies and objectives have protections and guidelines for buffering and protecting those areas and building around those things that are protected. And of course, we've got the high, medium, and low habitat qualities in there as well. Our subdivision and zoning resolutions take their cues from the comprehensive master plan, and that's where the real teeth is, because those are the regulations, but they implement the philosophy that's in the comprehensive master plan. Going back to our wildlife resources map out of comprehensive master plan, I'd like to draw your attention to the top left. Those red squares are the wildlife underpasses. So we've got one up on the very left one up on Roxborough Park Road, 4 on Waterton Road. Now there's 3 shown on Highway 85. That long middle one did not get built, but we got 2 on US Highway 85. And then to the south end, the I-25 gap project just recently was built over the last few years. 18 miles of I-25 between south of Castle Rock and into northern El Paso County was widened from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, really 8. I mean, they're functionally 6, but they're built for 8. Those will be incorporated later. These are a blow up of the Waterton Canyon crossings here. Back to the I-25 project. So this gap project bisected 55 square miles of protected habitat in the south end of the county, triggering the 4F rule of the 1966 Federal Highways Act. So out of that, we got some mitigation. So the problem was, you see the picture at the bottom left. That's what the highway used to look like. While it was at risk, and there were a lot of wildlife vehicle collisions, wildlife could cross across the highway in that large protected open area, especially at night. But after reconstruction, there was an elevation separation between northbound and southbound, anywhere between 4 and 12 feet of vertical separation, requiring those retaining walls. So imagine a deer out getting on the highway and pinballing between the lanes and that retaining wall, they're going to get hit. So it required exclusionary fencing along most of that 18-mile stretch. Because of that, it was a $450 million project. We got $20 million of wildlife improvements, including 5 wildlife underpasses, exclusionary fencing, and appurtenances. After that, we were able to secure $15 million in funding to build one of the largest wildlife overpasses in the world right in the middle of that project area, and another $2 million CDOT kicked in to do some exclusionary fencing north of Castle Rock approaching Denver, where you're having just too many vehicle collisions up there. This is a kind of a blow up of our wildlife plan, mobility plan in the I-25 gap area. The brown deer represent the underpasses. One is in northern El Paso County down by Monument, the other 4 in southern Douglas County. And the green one is the location of the wildlife underpass or overpass that is now under construction. And those of you that are going the Douglas County tour will get to see that on Wednesday. This is an example just to show you the size and scope of these things. They need to have an openness factor to allow for ungulates to feel comfortable passing underneath. You know, hoofed animals, deer now don't like to go in caves or tunnels or canyons. It's just scary for them. So if it's more open, they're more likely to use it. This is 18 feet tall by 100 feet wide. One of our culverts went from this to this. And these are pictures of 3 of the 5 underpasses, just to, again, give you some scope and scale of what these things look like right after construction. Of course, they're more vegetated now. And they're being used. Our wildlife cameras and data is showing some heavy usage, and different species are using more, more of one and less of another, but they're all being used, and we're seeing the different species using them in different locations. This is a mock-up of the Greenland Overpass, one of the largest in the world. It measures 200 feet wide by 450 feet long. It's got some very innovative design with some lighter soils and materials and insulation and things like that to keep vegetation alive on it. But again, it's under construction right now, and some of you get to see that on Wednesday. Again, that's summarizing what we've done over the last 30 years. Fortunately, some really smart people had some oversight foresight to start preserving land 30 years ago and incorporate a wildlife plan into a comprehensive master plan about 23 years ago. And this led to all of this. And I think we have secured our wildlife herds and flocks in perpetuity in Douglas County if we can keep the wolves out. Thank you.
Hey everyone, let's stand up and sit down. Ready? Go. Go. Woo, woo, woo. Shake it out. Shake it out. It's really hot. We've been talking a lot. Oh, but don't. Oh, no. All right. Hello. 7 minutes. Go. My name is Kylie Paul. I work for the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. We're an organization based in Montana, but we work globally on connectivity and crossings. And I am excited to bring this all together because I've been working for a while on a document that's been trying to summarize the really great stuff that really great people have been doing in the nation related to wildlife connectivity and local government planning. So I have a background a bit, having worked for Missoula County in Montana. So I have some local government experience there, and I know a lot about connectivity. So it's been exciting to work on this project, and it's been very kindly funded by Pew Charitable Trusts, and the goal has been to include around the nation examples of local governments that have integrated connectivity into their plans, policies, programs, et cetera, et cetera. So, well, and also basically what I'm doing right now is distilling what you've heard. So if you feel like you've heard it before, it's because I actually interviewed each of these people. And they are really great examples of such activities that can be done. So basically, what I want to push out there is the major call to action for every single one of us to get more involved in local government when you care about anything having to do with wildlife at all. That's been already brought up here a couple times. So local governments, they hold land use authority over 2/3 of the non-federal lands in the US. Now that's unfortunately not in just one local government, because that'd be easy, but in like thousands and thousands and thousands of them. But it's still a really important thing we need to work on and within. And so therefore they have a huge influence on habitat fragmentation, biodiversity, and connectivity, and of course related human health associated with all of that. Similarly, they have a really important role in wildlife crossings. So priority locations that we develop under great science are not always adjacent to protected public lands. And so they need other tools to help make those landscapes connected into the future if you put a crossing structure in those locations in the first place. So things like conservation easements, land acquisitions, and some kind of land use planning mechanism. Okay, so I'm going to here distill everything. Basically, the best approaches to getting connectivity into local government processes, there's a million different ways to do it and a million different orders in which you can do this. But simply, it's really good to know science and have that mapped. So you really need to know in some form or fashion where are animals or whatever sensitive lands or conservation kind of oriented things like wetlands or whatever, but we're talking about connectivity here. So where are animals moving, and then get that on a map. This is fairly simple and straightforward, but it can be very challenging for a local government to say, oh, like, great, okay, how do I do that? That's an important role for folks like us to be undertaking, to be partners with them. Then there's planning. Andy talked about the vision, the philosophy of Douglas County. Planning through comprehensive plans, that's their role. They provide that vision and direction for a local government. And okay, I'm sorry, backtrack. I'm saying local government, that's counties, that's towns, that's cities, that's boroughs. They all also have different terms. It's not all called comprehensive plans. It might be a growth policy, it might be a town plan, it might be this, that, or the other. I'm just gonna call them comprehensive plans. So that's that vision. And then an element plan is actually kind of a more detailed piece to a comprehensive plan. So you can have a transportation element. You could have an open space element. You could have a wildlife connectivity element plan, for instance. Then there's the policies, the regulation, incentives. These are the rules and incentives and tools. So there's zoning, there's overlay zoning that came up a lot in these really good examples. A lot of communities use overlay zones to have this very specific location through which different kinds of regulations were, or incentives and tools were used and required. And then standards are those, basically, those rules, those specific things related to design and density and all of that. I'm really summarizing right now. Then you've got the tools that are available that are incentive-based, that are voluntary, that help push things to get what you want without forcing folks to do, like these density bonuses and pushing for the cluster development. Okay, and then overall, generically, you're trying to use approaches, this is fairly straightforward, that have co-benefits or co-locate. So it's really a lot easier to say, hey, we're not only protecting wildlife habitat in this area, we're also working on these things you need to protect anyway, like floodplains and washes and storm situations and anything else that folks are trying to protect in some form or fashion. Then it's also, of course, trying to secure and expand those protected open spaces, have buffers from the natural resources. You're striving to limit density, development, activities, and mapped corridors, and incentivize the building. I mean, we need more, there's more people on the landscape, right? Everywhere, and they need places to live. Affordable housing, big deal, right? So you need to, there's all sorts of ways to get around and towards those actions, but incentivizing building towards the town centers versus the sprawling out into the wildlife zones and so on. And then again, clustering development such that you have, when you're going to have your areas built, then you have them closer together with the open spaces into good connected span. All right. So again, overall, enabling conditions beyond those policies planned, you need funding, the land protection component, staff, like having an Andy, like having a Todd on staff for local government, really key. And having the partnerships that a lot of us are actually involved in, helping push these things, again, because the staff, if they do have biologists, for instance, they still need the partnerships from efforts and resources from others. Having a larger regional approach rather than just like, this is our county and this is all we're mapping and this is all we're looking at. And then having supportive state roles, like Mari and Tiffany spoke about with the legislation, that really they can have a massive impact, of course, to have a strong state governance component pushing local governments to do actions, hugely useful. And then there's a lot of agency staff and agency programs that support local governments that are, there's some really great ones in Vermont, North Carolina, Maine, etc. Meanwhile, here are just a tiny number of the many examples that are discussed in the report and that are doing really great work around the nation, and just so many more. So the huge take home, get involved, and not only for your work, but also as a public member, just speaking up and saying, I care about wildlife, bringing your neighbor, I care about wildlife. Can we please, in our comprehensive plan, when it's being revised every few years, get something in there that our community values wildlife? That's a big first step, and it's honestly not that hard to do that little thing. So there's some important steps that we all can take. Thank you. And if you want more details, I'm actually speaking in more depth tomorrow on this very topic, where I don't buzz through all these weird words or boring, straightforward words. Yeah.
Should be good, right? Stand right here.
You can stand
right behind. Perfect.
So I'm just gonna say one more thing, because I'm an old guy, and if you didn't get the take-home message, this is important shit. Get involved locally, whether that's, and I'm so stupid, I actually volunteered for planning commission in my hometown, which is not where I work, so. Again, if we as professionals aren't doing it, it's not likely to get done. Amen.
PSA from Todd Black. Thank you. All right, folks. Thanks for hanging in with us and wrapping out the first day. So I'm going to open up with a first question topic, really kind of picking up on the enabling conditions point. Unplanned, by the way, nice natural segue. But you know, whether it's something political, socio-political, a technical breakthrough, I'm really curious if there's something that you would point to that you felt like really led to getting traction on that policy idea at the time that you did, because a good idea without, you know, those right enabling conditions is not going to get the traction. So just curious about, you know, from your experience, what you might point to. And you got to turn that on to.
Okay. Yeah, AB 2344, I think I could speak to, because in 2022 was the groundbreaking of the Wallace Sanford Liberty Canyon crossing in LA. So folks were really excited about crossings and really wanted to push those forward. At the same time, we had Senator Friedman, our author, is a transportation chair in the legislature, who is also a real champion of wildlife crossing. So those two things at the same time really made the political conditions and the political will all really right to pass along.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think another thing, in addition to those things, one thing that seems like really obvious now, but I feel like is something that was really helpful, was like the human safety element. I think really helped the wildlife connectivity piece be more accepted as a bipartisan thing, because it was really exciting when, and a lot of that had to do with the work of Laura Friedman, who is a complete rock star But I think like having the safety element, even the name of our bill is the Safe Roads and Wildlife Protection Act. And so I think like that actually also helps open people's minds a little bit more to like, oh, do we need state policy for this? Is this important? And so we've got the human element and the wildlife element there.
Anybody else want to speak to this one? Andy?
So Douglas County is the sort of conservative bastion in the Front Range of Colorado and the Denver metro area. And, having a lot of regulation ran down the throats of conservatives is not real popular. But at the same time, I mean, there's a kind of a misnomer in my opinion that the liberal agenda is the conservative agenda. And we just don't see it. We just offer incentives and partnerships and things like that. We're able to put together this, what I think is an incredible complex through, again, largely voluntary incentive-based operations or opportunities, and with a few regulations that would just steer development processes.
Okay, next topic is more on the wildlife side of things. So whether it's from the design of the policy itself or the implementation, really curious about, maybe a little bit more reflection on how it's working in practice. I'm thinking about a lot of attention towards ungulates. Secretarial Order 3362 was a big moving piece, motivation for a lot of work that's going on. So I'm curious about, are there species or taxa that you are finding were not as well accounted for or accommodated either in the design of the policy or how it's rolling out and influencing on the ground conditions?
I can take a first stab at that one. The map that I showed, the Planning for Wildlife map for Chaffee County, it was done, again, through a number of partners, including our local Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or CPW representatives. But CPW in our region, they employ a big game biologist, but they don't employ another wildlife biologist. And so a lot of that map really takes into account, what is the best habitat for mule deer, elk, pronghorn, moose, black bear, kind of. And so, but what it didn't do was take into account other things like pinyon jays or like, there's a herb session going on now. And so that's one of the reasons that we included the requirement to do an individual property specific study, because we have a map in general, but we don't know exactly what's on that property or what's in that area. And the hope is longer term, those studies in these areas can help kind of fill in some of those gaps for other species, so that we've got a better, maybe a little more scientific understanding of what's actually on the land and in the waters of our county.
So just real quick, I think too, one thing that we need to be thinking about is there's real differences in migrating species that migrate versus species that are just there and use the habitat, the corridor, if you will, on a daily basis. It's part of the home range. So, and also as you design these things, you think about and be thinking about what's the biggest ungulate, the biggest animal that will be using these corridors. And if you design for them, then that takes care of a lot of the smaller critters.
Thanks, and I'm going to pick up on that too, which sort of segues into another topic I wanted to ask about, which is, I guess we could just introduce it, but it's on the topic of mapping, right? That comes up a lot of how important it is. I think many of us also understand how challenging it can be depending on what you're trying to represent and how it's going to be used. So I think the question I want to ask is about, getting to a point or how you designed it in the process to say that, yes, this is the map that we're going to use to inform these kinds of decisions, that the policy is going to support. Whether it's specific species, focal species, habitat conditions, some composite, a lot of choices to be made, and then getting to that point of consensus that, we're going to point to this map or these series of maps to inform these kinds of decisions can be a highly political exercise.
So Douglas County, we have a relatively small staff for the acres that we manage. We have 65,000 acres of open space and conservation. We have a staff of 10 for the longest time, I think we're up to 12 now. And some of these other counties have 150. And so we said, it's going to take PhD level expertise to be able to map every individual species. And we document our Carolina's document over 350 species using the local riparian areas. We do not have that level of expertise nor time to map every one. Certainly, Steve has their, big game, winter range, summer range, all that stuff. We did look at all of that. But we took the ecosystem management approach, basically saying, if we conserve ponderosa pine forest, Gambelow, grass prairie, lower riparian, all these different habitat types, and sufficient quantity and continuity and connection, whatever's supposed to be there will be there. We will preserve the habitat for all of them. And we were able to lower the bar on the science and just do an ecosystem-based approach. And then once we protected or preserved that, then we try to make sure it's as high a quality as we can. So, make sure we minimize disturbance through managing recreational corridors, downlighting, bird use, vegetative screening along subdivisions, things like that. So you minimize disturbance, control needs, minimize human disturbance, and things like that. Create the habitat quality that you want, and everything that's supposed to be there will be there. So we did it in a dumbed down way, but it has been very successful for us.
We're going to stay after that. Geez. But this is a great example of what a lot of communities have done, especially in places that don't have migratory species. Florida, there's some counties that have done some really great, there's the whole Florida corridor map, so that's different, but that have mapped out corridors, but then also focus on different types of habitats. And so they're connecting landscapes that way, and that's the cue instead of necessarily mapped corridor. And then also similarly in some communities that might not, in some places wildlife corridor is not that cool or that interesting to people. They're caring more again about the riparian areas and the wetlands and so on. And so when they can kind of combine those into the sensitive lands overlay or critical areas overlay or something like that, it's less complicated to understand, for one thing. It takes some of that burden off of the species specific approach. So that can be another way to get through a lot of biodiversity.
And I've got an additional approach. Maybe we just sort of fell into it. We actually, the maps that we had were originally created for recreation purposes, specifically for some of our trail user groups in terms of where to site a new mountain bike trail or to inform seasonal closures of mountain bike trails or hiking trails in our county, which is heavily reliant on outdoor recreation for its economy. And so we had all these maps that were created kind of with a separate purpose, and I did not have time or really the funding to go back and try to rejigger those for land development purposes. So we've started here, but as we get more information, our CPW guys just got collars on some mule deer and elk populations in our county within the last 6 or 8 months, I believe. And so going forward, we will have more data to help kind of move those maps around. We're standing up a quarterly group of wildlife professionals that we meet with as a county to try to figure, all right, what's the right sort of frequency to revisit this map and update it with any new information that we get. So I think 3 to 5 years, we might, as we get new information, or as that collar data comes out, we will probably adjust our map. But originally, I had something I thought, to dump the science guy even more, something I thought might work. And it was either that or nothing. And so to try to get this thing at least started, we use the map that our records created. And, hopefully that dovetails enough with what we need to do from a private land development perspective. Time will tell.
I hate to be the devil or Debbie Downer, but the realities are this: putting it on a map is the easy button, and then talking to a landowner who says, hell no, and if I don't, are you going to condemn my land? That's hard, right? So there has to be a little flexibility in there, and my map's changing every 3 to 6 months. So it's just, there's a lot of behind the scene themes that are just hard. I'll tell you right now, I want to kick the BLM square in the, you know what? I mean, the hoops that I have to go through and jump through to get a damn fence on BLM is like, good grief, people. Frustrating.
Anything you want to add on this one? Or?
All right.
Okay.
I guess this conversation is just making me think of Ventura County and what we do in California, right? And so I think what's really amazing is there are a lot of existing resources that Mari pointed out to and during the presentation. That there are these models that were made based on certain target species, least cost pathway analyses, but then also habitat species relationships that CDFW has done. So there's a lot of really great existing data that is at the statewide level. But for Ventura County, what was really important is ground truthing those maps, because parcel by parcel, they have found a lot of different issues, I think kind of like what you were alluding to. And I think that it's a really good starting point, but there's always going to be an evolution of those maps. And it has a lot to do with not just the land and what people want to do on the land, but also public opinion and what people feel they have the right to do as landowners. And so I think it's really important to identify, okay, we have all these data, but what are the gaps? And then that ground truthing is really important, and having to go parcel by parcel can be really time intensive and resource intensive. And so I think those are definite challenges that I don't have answers to, but I think it is worth investigating and revisiting often enough as we learn more, because we're constantly learning so much about different species that move around us. Animals that we thought were extirpated from a certain area are actually back, or maybe they're going to get reintroduced because there's really great habitat. And I think those are really important things to consider for these kinds of land use planning opportunities.
Well, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So just show of hands and we'll dig right in.
Do you want me to?
Okay. Yeah. The old toss up of repeating the question, running the mic. We're going to run the mic.
Thank you all for your time and giving us insightful things and also things to take home. Question for whoever will answer in regards to AB 2344. We are doing our best to identify the barriers that are needed to share with CDFW, but as you all know, this law doesn't mandate money for us to build the projects. So we tend to incorporate all the barriers into projects that are coming, and there's a barrier on that funding portion also. So would you take my message to all the legislative people to talk to CTC, which is California Transportation Commission, to make it easy and also add more money when, especially if the project is identified as a barrier as a result of AB 2344. That's my first question. Second question, cohabitation, yes, is so bad. We love to travel from here to Africa and other places to see safaris and enjoy them. But the one here, we just want them to escape all that. So that one too, I want, as I have friends in India, Mumbai, where they have leopards and tigers living with people side by side. I was enjoying P22 on the guy, and now rodenticide have become our friend. And so cohabitation, can we also look into where we can have rodenticide as we use it to kill a lot of poisons? Thank you.
So I'll just bring this. I'm going to run it mic over here. I think we know where the question's directed over to the California folks.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. Yes, you noted something about reaching out to the CTC that is honored to do this. So yeah, thank you for noting that. And I'll let Tiffany answer the question about rodenticides.
Yeah, thank you for those great questions. I think in terms of the rodenticides, there is a lot, you're right, there's a lot of work to be done. And some of the things that the Center for Biological Diversity has been doing is we've been trying to run and get several bills passed to remove those kinds of rodenticides from the landscape, particularly first generation and second generation anticoagulant rodenticide poisonings or rodenticides. I think what's challenging is, despite several laws being passed, we're still seeing so much of it on the landscape. And so what's the next step? Will we try to get these other rodenticides banned or like really limit their use? And I think obviously that's a very limited solution to the problem. And so I think some of it also has to do with educating the public, getting folks to understand that these rodenticides aren't really targeting the species that are the pests, that they are affecting so many different species, including the many species that we love. And I think that message is slowly getting out there, but it is still has some growth or needs some growth. And so I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but I agree with you, and thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, next up, all right.
Yeah, I was really fascinated, Miles, by what you said about kind of your county's name again. I'm so sorry.
Chaffee.
Chaffee. I know I messed up. I work at the state level, so I just think states. But yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned that there are a lot of surrounding counties, and you're the winter range for those big game corridors. And maybe this is for you too, Kylie. But to what extent are there like processes or ways that counties that are engaging in this process can really be interacting with counties around them? Because we all know landscape level connectivity is like high priority, and I'm just curious, even in Utah too, which is where I'm from, like the extent to which you were looking kind of outside of other migration corridors, or if it really, in some cases, might not be necessary because it is sort of just one really high priority corridor. But how can counties and local land use folks be interacting with these spaces? I don't know if there's like an existing conference that does like wildlife people and land use people, but anything like that that's been helpful.
Well, I don't think, unfortunately, at this moment, there's a structured approach to do so nationwide, for instance, that would be a typical way to go about. I know that I think very often it's brought about via conservation organizations, these regional partnership approaches. I know Ron Sutherland back there is involved in one in the Durham camp, triangle area where numerous counties are working with numerous different agencies within themselves and external to themselves. There's watershed districts. There's an example in Minnesota where there's a really good county, and they also have one of their staff members has broader jurisdictional authority because they're part of a watershed something, I don't remember the term, but so if you can find the larger, bigger authority approach, that can be beneficial, and then bring that to the county space. But really, I think it almost always relies on the people and somebody initiating something. And it can also very often, presumably, revolve around perhaps a broader topic that's more all-encompassing, or it's similarly encompassing, and then they're like, oh, let's include connectivity in this. So I think it's gonna be a case by case, but perhaps we should have a new way to do that as a formal way. What do you say, Mama?
Well, and I think I'm the guy maybe standing between you and cold beers after this, so I'll try to be quick. But I think I can point to more problems than solutions there right now. What's interesting about Chaffee County, at least where we are, our CPW region, we're in the southeast region of the state of Colorado. Our CDOT region for transportation, we are in region 5, which is the southwest. We are the only county that is in both of those. And so, a lot of times that means that typically our transportation folks and our CPW folks are not really working with one another on very many projects unless it happens in our specific county. And I think that's indicative of kind of the way, we've got local area councils of government, we've got different regions, transportation planning regions and things of that nature, but nothing yet that we have solidified into a more regional group based around wildlife and really around wildlife movement. And I think that's kind of the next step here. We have, you know, of the counties that border ours, many of them are, well, I would say it's about half and half in terms of sort of where they fall on the political spectrum, if they're similar or not. But I think everybody kind of has a very similar desire to protect and provide for that wildlife. But I think that's probably the next frontier for this movement is really bringing together coalitions of those counties that are specific to those movement areas, because otherwise, you know, I think it's going to get lost in the you know, somewhere in the shuffle between what is this a transportation project, wildlife project, you know, and that sort of thing. So I don't really have a great answer for you, but I think it really is the next step here.
Thank you, Miles. Hey, we're at the time here. So first of all, thanks again to the organizers. Thank you to all of the presenters, and thank you all for being here. We're at 4 o'clock, so it's time to wrap up. Thanks again.